beloved, we are gathered here today to discuss The Infinite Noise by Lauren Shippen. I'm Anna.
I'm Sophia.
And we're two sisters who review any P-brain thought that comes in our head.
Take a number.
Quick summary.
This book is based on a podcast written by Lauren Shippen. Okay, so the plot of The Bright Sessions, the podcast, is that it's a therapist and all of her clients are atypicals, and these are people with powers. And Caleb is an empath. So in this book, we're taken through the journey of Caleb realizing he has powers and then realizing he's in love with Adam. So really, guys, this is just about the gays. It's not about anything to do with the powers. It's just about Adam and Caleb. And the book is split between both of their point of views, and it goes back and forth very frequently.
This is a YA story with sci-fi sprinkled in.
Yeah.
Which is fun. And I say that sprinkled in.
Pros and cons of the book. Anna, you want to start us off?
Pros. They're adorable. Every single moment that you wished you could see in the podcast, you get to see in this book, and it is so beautiful and wonderful, and you get in-depth point of view from both of these characters that previously you only heard via voice memos.
And Lauren Shippen, the character of Adam, is a character who suffers from depression.
And it is written so well. It's so vividly. You feel it. You understand completely.
There is sci-fi sprinkled in. Part of that sci-fi is the fact that Caleb is an empath. And the way she writes that is so stunning. It absolutely blows me away. I love the way that is written by Lauren Shippen. I think that's one of the great things.
The last pro is also a con. It is written and it reads like fan fiction, which means that you follow along
and you love it
and it gives you everything that you want from the podcast. But what it also does is it already expects you to know major backstory from the podcast.
For instance, the scenes where Caleb is in therapy, we don't actually get to read those sessions.
It
fades to black.
It fades to black. It cuts to the next scene. And all of those important moments that Caleb has with Dr. Bright in the podcast, you don't get in the book. Because of that, you don't get the progress that Caleb has in the podcast. And to be fair, most of that in the podcast is him relaying the things that have happened in his life, meeting Adam, the stuff that happens.
Yes.
But we don't actually get to see him being therapized.
And another thing is that this plot lacks a real
momentum.
Yeah, it lacks a real momentum, which isn't a problem when you're reading fan fiction. You're like, yes, of course.
This is what you want.
When you're reading a published piece of fiction, you want an antagonist.
Yes.
And I know that Adam's depression is an antagonist. I know it's all, and same with Caleb's struggle with his empathy and his powers. But it didn't feel like there was enough of a moving force. Mm-hmm. It was all emotional and character driven.
It wasn't fulfilling enough.
And if you haven't listened to the podcast, you would have enjoyed it, but you probably were also like, what?
Because what it does is it kind of skims over the fact that Caleb has powers. There's never really any in-depth realization of, oh my gosh, I have powers. It's more like, okay, this is my life now and that's what I'm doing. And to be fair, that could just be, a normal reaction that Caleb would have. But it feels like it doesn't explain to the reader enough what is going on.
Yeah.
And the reason being is that in the podcast itself, Caleb and Adam are not driving the plot. They are nice little side
like
plot.
I said, they were background characters. Caleb is a character, but Adam doesn't get featured for a pretty long time.
Yes, and it does show because without the other characters from the show, the plot doesn't really pick up. And I'm not saying that this is bad.
I still really enjoyed it.
This is such a good book and I love it so much. It just seemed to me that you might be a little confused if you didn't have all the backstory from the podcast.
Yeah. And by the way, I'm wearing a t-shirt that is from the podcast.
So we are fans. We love this show.
I entered a freaking contest to guess songs off of playlists for the characters, and I won stickers, my dudes.
And you got like a handwritten note from Lauren
I did get,
Shippen?
because it was right around my birthday. I literally got the news on my birthday.
Oh my gosh, I remember
Do you?
that.
Yeah.
So
We're fans.
we say this out of complete and total love.
I loved it. As a fan, it was a 5 out of 5. I couldn't have asked for more, but when I stepped back and I just used my a little bit of critical thinking, I kind of realized there isn't very much plot happening, which I understand. But the biggest issue is that if you don't know the podcast, you're just thrown in and you're confused. And what this book should have been is it should have been a perfect introduction to the podcast.
Yeah, it should have sold you on the podcast. It should have been, here's it explained, and now you need to go listen to the podcast.
Yeah, it should have been like, hold on, they're talking about things that I want to know about, but their characters don't know about. That's what it should have been. I think that should have been a part, and I think it would have fixed the problem where we felt like it was stagnant or lacking in momentum.
Mm-hmm. And to be fair, there may be people who've read this and have never read the podcast, or have read the podcast and think that this was written perfectly. They might think that this was perfectly done.
Yeah.
This is just our take
personal
on it.
Opinion.
Last note, you get to see the other side characters very minutely.
Yeah.
The characters who are fleshed, obviously, since it's not their story, they're not as fleshed out as they are in the podcast, but they still aren't talked about enough, in our opinions. Like, it just seemed kind of jammed in there.
Well, it's not only that, but there are, like, 2 school bullies. There are a lot of other side characters where you're like, you didn't do anything. You know, Caitlin is there for, like, 3 scenes. And then there's another character named Moses, and then there are the 2 bullies, and there are just people running around willy-nilly, and it's like,
to be fair,
you could have given us a plot line with that.
To be fair, that is what happens in high school. People are just running around willy-nilly.
I still feel like these characters within the book, they could have had background plot lines. We just discussed how it felt like the plot needed a bigger thing to help, a bigger antagonist. Mm-hmm. And they could have been that. But
yeah. To be fair, though, if she had added something like that, it might have detracted from the main focus, and it could have gotten messy.
And it probably would have messed up with the plot
timeline.
Yeah, the timeline.
Because she had already...
Yeah, the podcast is
already existed before she even thought of writing the book or
yeah.
had the opportunity, so she had very strict timelines that she had to work within.
Yeah. Time for the rubric. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, the first category is romance. Anna, what do you rate the romance?
I rated a 5 out of 5.
I also rated a 5 out of 5.
Because the tension
good, guys.
And the love and the angst and the...
Literally, it
was everything I wanted. Everything I wanted.
Very good build up, the slow realization. It's just
the
good.
Ethical questions that Caleb has to ask himself.
Well, just the rituals are intricate, guys. They're intricate. Our next category is plot, right? Yeah.
Yes. And I rated it a 4 out of 5.
I rated it a 3 out of 5.
Even though there's not a ton of external plot driving them on. I mean, I say that, but there's like a lot that goes on. They go through a lot of emotional turmoil, which I do consider plot. Like, they have to work for it.
That is true.
And but there are times where there could have been a better integration of the podcast plot, and I feel like that was a missed opportunity.
Yeah, those are the reasons I gave it a 3. You just rated it higher, and I rated it lower. I was like, no, you sit back there. Because I'm thinking about the emotional turmoil that they go, and I'm throwing that all at the character for the character category, which brings us to our ratings for the characters. Anna, what did you rate the characters?
I rated it a 4 out of 5, and Sophia rated it
5 out of 5 because of the emotional turmoil. I felt like Caleb and Adam, first off, they're incredibly fleshed out and real characters.
So felt.
They have been so thought out and so wonderfully written. They're phenomenal. So it's absolutely a 5 out of 5 for me. Why is it a 4?
I gave it a 4 out of 5 because of the side characters weren't fulfilling enough.
Yeah.
And so that just detracted it for me, but Caleb and Adam, 10/10, are just so fantastic. Mm-hmm. And they are everything that I could have wished for, honestly. I love them so much. I think Caleb and Adam are all-stars. I think they're fantastic.
Yes. World building.
I give it a 3 out of 5.
I give it a 2 out of 5. Honestly.
Because the world in the podcast is so interesting, and then in the book, she barely does anything with it. And it's a little frustrating to me, honestly, because this is the part, you know, the whole point of this book is that you could sell people on the podcast, and I don't think he did it enough.
Yeah. I give it a 2 out of 5 because of what you said about the podcast, and also the fact that I felt like the background characters were wasted, which you added to the characters category, but then I was thinking about those characters and I was like, no, they belong in world building.
Which brings us to whether or not it was a good ending. And I gave it a 3 out of 5.
I give it a 3 out of 5.
And the reason being is the ending kind of felt abrupt, and it didn't feel like it answered enough questions, which is fair because in the podcast those questions are not answered. But it felt a little abrupt and just a tiny bit cheesy, but it's a good kind of cheesy.
It is a good kind of cheesy, but it's still a solid 3 for me. Because
literally when we were doing this rubric, we got to good ending and I'm like, how did it end again?
Yeah, guys. Anyways, our final scores ended up being
a 19 out of 25 for me.
And an 18 out of 25 for me.
Which is a 3.8 out of 5.
And a 3.6 out of 5.
And although in my heart of hearts, this is a 5 out of 5 for me.
Yes,
critically
absolutely.
Thinking. This is my critical thoughts, but emotionally, it's a 5.
My gut instinct is like, just love it. And I do. But when I sat down and put it down to paper, I was like, how's it hold up? My brain was like, well, actually. So that's why we get a 3.6. Which I still think is 3.8. I still think that's a good score. You know, it's still a good book. But I would only recommend it if you knew the podcast.
Well, no, I would recommend it to people who don't know the podcast.
You just leave them stumbling like that? You just do it like that?
I think it's meant for people who haven't read the podcast because it's meant for a wider audience.
How did this get here? Carry on.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Okay.
So, thank you for listening to our review. Anna and I will now be doing an in-depth recap, which
will be full of spoilers. So this was our spoiler-free review. The next will be completely chock full of them. And if you would like to come on over, and if you've already read the book, or if you would just like to be spoiled, this is for you.
Maybe we amuse you.
But as it is, thank you for watching. This is Take a Number with Anna and Sophia. And if you have any other recommendations for us on what you would like to see us review, it's going to have to take a number.
2 different energies, but the desperation is real.